Keir Starmer is still keen to secure a deal with the US. It's unclear what a deal with the US might look like, given that the base level of tariffs on the UK is 10%, which is now the level being imposed on all countries other than China. Will, what does a deal for the UK look like? And what are we offering up in return, potentially?
Well, like you say, that 10% level, we didn't get the minimum 10% level because
we're brilliant negotiators and because we've got a special relationship.
No, our special relationship, such as it is, counted for absolutely nothing whatsoever. Is entirely down to the fact that in goods alone, services quite different, but in goods, we actually have a small trade deficit with the US. They sell us slightly more stuff than we sell them. According to American stats, sometimes the ONS can record it slightly differently. But,
don't tell anyone.
But anyway, the difference would be so small that you'd be around that sort of 10% bit. We definitely don't talk about services because we sell them a lot more services than we buy from them.
We don't talk about services.
Don't tell Trump about services. We got the basic deal, and I think the basic deal will probably continue to apply to most things. I think what is probably more important is the things that aren't covered by the basic deal at the moment. Our biggest exports to the US in goods are cars and pharmaceuticals. Those are the major things that affect, jobs in the UK economy. Cars currently subject to a 25% tariff into the US. That's really serious, especially serious for labour, because most of the big car factories, I think all but one of the major car plants in the UK are in Labour constituencies. Pharmaceuticals, at time of recording, untariffed, but that could well change. So those are very significant areas for the UK economy, and that's to be negotiated on. What we might give them, I think there might be concessions to be made on VAT, which Donald Trump hates and sees as a tariff. It's not, but he sees it as one. There might be concessions on our digital services tax, or there might be other sort of political concessions that some of his backers, like friends in Silicon Valley, might want, like some sort of looking at the online safety bill, which Americans on the right see as impinging freedom of speech. Some of those things, I think it's probably fine to put them on the table. Like the digital services tax doesn't raise a huge amount of money, and it hasn't been particularly effective in its stated purpose, which is to save the British high street. But there are other things like the online safety bill where you say, well, that has a really clear political purpose. That is a political and social decision that our government made. It would be really concerning if we were going to hand that over in order to appease an administration that has been, extremely aggressive in the way that it has addressed tariffs towards us. So I think fundamentally what a good deal is for the UK is the best deals to be made now are with people other than the US. It's to strengthen all of your other trading relationships, particularly with Europe, obviously our biggest trading partner as a bloc. The US is the biggest single country trading partner. Those are the key deals to make, really. And then to kind of, because you just can't predict what Trump is going to do. How do you don't know if he's going to renege on these commitments. You don't know what's going to happen. So deal with the grown-ups first.
Well, JD Vance, I think, said something like no free trade without free speech. So I think the online safety bill and certain other free speach trigger points are being watched closely in Washington. Interestingly, Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch kind of said she agreed with JD Vance on that. I've written this week on how the British Conservatives are responding, free market, free trade, loving Liz Truss. What's her response to it all? So if you want to know what's going on in that small, incoherent corner of the political ecosystem, I have written about that. But more, probably bigger issue, no, definitely bigger issue than what's going on with Liz Truss. Freddie, China, because we've been talking about this 90-day pause in these tariffs, but that does not apply to China, which is now facing tariffs of 125% as punishment for retaliating. What is going on here, and can the US weather it? Can China weather it? Can any of us weather it?
So this is a tit-for-tat trade war. Trump initiated those first tariffs and China responded, and then Trump's responded and China responded, and that's where we are. It's spiraling a little bit at the moment, and they're getting to huge levels. 125% is a remarkable level, and essentially someone, I think, compared it in the media the other day to an embargo. You just can't get beyond that. We have to see this in the broader context of where Trump's team is on China. They're a very China skeptic team. I mean, as I said earlier, J.D. Vance and others were telling the president that the most important thing to do here was to direct the trade war against China and keep other people, Vietnam or Europe or whatever it might be, slightly separate, because they see China as such a threat. So it's a political thing as much as an economic thing. They want to pursue a decoupling from the Chinese economy so that they're less reliant on it. There are many people who during the pandemic were panicking about the fact that pharmaceuticals or PPE or whatever it might be, or manufacturing goods, or in essence supply chains in general, all went through China, and they were vulnerable to that. So there's lots of skepticism about China. That's the key thing. And we also know from Trump's first term that he shares that. Now, can anyone weather this? It depends how long it goes on. Again, is this negotiating strategy, or is this a long-term plan? There are lots of people that want this broader decoupling. There's a big question about how they achieve that and whether it is sustainable. Apple, for instance, is one company whose market price has taken a big hit because they produce nearly all of their goods in China. They're trying to move some of their factories to India at the moment, and I think that'll be one effect of it. But you have to, and then let's talk about the Chinese perspective. So China's economy is built on exports, and it has been for the past 3 decades. They're also conscious of the fact that makes them vulnerable to other countries. They're also conscious of the fact that the US was heading towards this decoupling strategy. So they've been trying to address it too. The broader aim is to increase consumption, to make the Chinese economy slightly more like the EU and American economy, where you have consumption-led growth, and you don't have to export as much because your internal market will consume those sorts of things. That's going to take a long time to achieve. This is a big impetus to get there. But in the short term, this is obviously going to be dramatically dangerous for both sides.
And Will, what has this mean globally, and particularly with the countries in the Asian continent? China, Japan and South Korea, famously not the best of friends, have united for the first time, or had united, to jointly respond to the tariffs. Mm-hmm. Now Japan and South Korea are getting a reprieve. China isn't. The Asian markets have also taken a hit from all of this.
Yeah.
How do you see that playing out? Also, you've written for the New Statesman the last couple of weeks how this could be good for the UK in terms of cheap Chinese goods.
Possibly. Well, I mean, first of all, I think in terms of people in China's orbit, I mean, firstly, there's strength in numbers, but also China has significant economic weapons that it hasn't yet used, which the US doesn't have in this trade war. First of all, Donald Trump has rightly accused China of manipulating the price of its currency. So, where the Americans talk about what can we do to, change the value of the dollar relative to other countries' currencies, the Chinese do that every day, because they set the Chinese central bank, which is state-controlled, sets a reference price for the yuan, and then it trades around that. They can increase or diminish support for their currency in a much more significant way. So they can make their exports cheaper as a result, fairly easily, which is a tool that isn't really available to Western economies. China also owns a huge amount of Russian debt. So if China suddenly decides to start selling US Treasury bonds back into the bond market, it can accelerate any bond market disruption that might result from the US government going, sort of full tonto.
Technical economics term.
Yes, I think that there's a lot that China can do. But one possible result of things, the goods that aren't going to America from China will go elsewhere. I have previously written about, when you build a house, the most expensive material in a house is normally the steel. We already buy lots of Chinese steel, and that's been a problem for our steel industry. But we also want to build lots of houses. So there is going to be a lot of cheap Chinese steel washing around the global economy that potentially with a program of British house building could absorb. Similarly, timber. I was speaking to some timber people recently who said, we get pretty much all of our wood from Sweden, especially for house building again, but there's a lot of Canadian wood that might start making its way over here when it gets cheaper. So there are some things where, a trade war it isn't bad for every industry. It does create cheaper goods for some people. Although in terms of the wider global economy in general, it probably it dramatically increases the possibility of global recession.